Okay, we are now live on YouTube.
Well, good morning, everyone. I want to welcome everyone to the January 6th. Sorry, late night last night with the election and all. January 6th, 2021 Cvta Finance Committee. I hope everyone had a happy holiday, a Merry Christmas, and now a Happy New Year. We have a statement regarding virtual meetings, and I'll hand it over to Mr. Parsons.
Pardon me, I was muted. The statement was actually included in our agenda packet, so we don't need to read that in full. If there are any questions from the body, we can certainly answer those now in terms of participation in this open electronic meeting.
Are there any questions from the body? Seeing none, we'll move to the roll call on certification of quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll start with Chesterfield County, Mr. Carroll.
I'm here.
Hanover County, Vice Chairman Peterson.
Here.
Henrico County, Mr. Thornton.
Here.
City of Richmond, Chairman Stoney.
Here.
And Commonwealth Transportation Board, Mr. Brown.
Here.
That concludes the roll call, and I can certify that we have a quorum, Mr. Chairman.
A quorum has been established. Now we'll move on to our agenda for this morning. First, under the subject line of administration, we have the consideration of amendments to the meeting agenda, action meeting agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda? Seeing no changes, should we take a vote to approve the agenda? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. The action agenda is approved. We'll move on down to the approval of the December 9th, 2020 Cvta Finance Committee meeting minutes. Is there a motion to approve the Finance Committee meeting minutes as presented?
Take the motion to approve, Mr. Chair.
Mr.
Second.
Peterson. Mr. Peterson made the motion. It's been seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
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 The ayes have it. Well, now the minutes are approved. We'll now move on to item 3, the open public comment period. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to offer comments via email or in person? Seeing none, we'll move now on to item 4 of the agenda. That is now the Cvta Finance Committee Chairman's Report. As I stated earlier, I hope everyone had a safe, healthy, happy holidays, and also want to say Happy New Year to each of the members of the Cvta Finance Committee. And always, I want to thank every one of you all for participating today. I look forward to a productive meeting as the meetings we've had in the past. And would like to say thank you again for all your continued hard work as we continue to stand up first of its kind in Central Virginia Transportation Authority. So thank you all for your participation. I hope, again, you all had some enjoyable moments with your family over the holiday period. Now we're back here in January, and we got to get back down to work so we can get dollars into the coffers to start working on mobility and transit, things of that nature for Central Virginia. With that, I'll now move on to item 5 of the Cvta activities report. We'll begin. I'll ask Ms. Heater and Mr. Parsons to take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a few brief updates for you from the last meeting. We did notify the proposers for the insurance services RFP process and are working on collecting the information. We've received one of the coverage binders and are awaiting the other. So I think the holidays put a little bit of a delay in that, but otherwise they'll be ready to go and sent over to Mr. Thornton for signature as soon as we get those packages. So we're moving forward on that item. Happy also to share with you that with thanks to each of you for your participation and assistance with a lot of the information necessary to do the background checks for the establishment of the banking account. We do have a Cvta bank account with much thanks to the team at Chesterfield County. So we've got everything set up there for the initial deposits to get initiated later this month. And then we'll be moving the transactions to the disbursements to localities as well. So happy to report on that. Thanks to your action on the fiscal agent agreements for Chesterfield and the city. Those two things are in motion.
Do we have a CBTA TAC update?
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chair. So,
Yes. Good morning.
good morning. So the next TAC meeting for CVTA is on Monday, January 11th. We have not had a meeting since the last Finance Committee meeting, so there's no previous progress to report. On Monday's agenda, the primary thing we're going to be working on is the certification reporting process, which will include what are the legal requirements, what should be included in the project reporting, the agreement format, as well as a review process to assure project and program conformance of each locality's plan for expenditure of local funds. We'll also be discussing with each of the localities on kind of building each entity's list of projects and programs they plan on using the local funding for. And there will be a process put in place to have the TAC review those plans and then forward that to the full CBTA for consideration to make sure all the funds are expended appropriately. We'll also get an update on the Regional Public Transportation Plan that's being led by GRTC, as well as working to make a recommendation for the full body on the Transit Governance Report consultant selection. There were two consultant proposals submitted. There's a subgroup of TAC members that have reviewed those proposals, and we're meeting this Friday afternoon to make a recommendation to the full TAC. The full TAC will make a recommendation to the full CBTA at the meeting in January. And Chet will discuss in a little bit more detail the effort and as far as what that governance report will encompass, because you'll be looking at it as one of your agenda items. And the other thing that we're going to start working on at TAC is the project prioritization process for the regional funding. That will be an important process that we'll need to thoroughly consider and bring forward to the CBTA probably within the next several months. And that's it.
When we look at the regional project prioritization report, Mr. Uri, I just want to know, did you foresee this being a discussion that we would have with the full body moving forward? Seems something that's pretty significant. What are your thoughts?
Yes, sir. Whether that'll be on the January agenda or moving into February, I'll defer to Chet and Martha on that. But yeah, certainly it's a very important process for the CBTA. So it'll be, my guess is multiple discussions before we settle on a formal process.
All right, sounds good to me. Any questions for Mr. Uri regarding the CBTA TAC update?
Mr. Chair, this is Chet. I think Mr. Ure stated correctly. We certainly intend to have a detailed conversation at the TAC as well as the full authority on the project prioritization. I don't foresee that being on the agenda for the 29th. We'd like to get the TAC to reflect on it first and provide feedback to staff so that we can bring you something that everyone can support as we think about moving forward with project prioritization.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, this is Carlos.
Mr. Brown.
So, Chet, are we looking at modeling our prioritization process after one of the models that exists with regard to one of the other regional authorities, or are we trying to, do something from whole cloth here? What's our approach or the initial thinking?
No, sir, that's a great question. Our approach is to use what the TPO is developing right now for our long range plan process. there's a nice overlap with where that is in its life in terms of identifying regional priorities. And we have are developing a tool that starts off with smart scale and then pulls in additional equity components and some other evaluation data sets as well, so that we can look at regional projects and identify priorities for our long range plan. And staff's intention is to use that model that will be vetted by both TACs from the TPO as well as the Cbta and our citizens committee to make sure that it meets all the needs of the TPO as well as the Cbta in terms of identifying regional priorities. Our intent is that 35% should be identical in terms of project impacts to what the Cbta is looking for. Obviously, the Cbta may have additional measures that it would like to include in evaluating projects, but we wanted to bring the TAC that tool first as the foundation for setting priorities.
Yeah, I assume that the jurisdictional members are probably getting some briefing on the direction that we're heading here. If it's possible, I would like to, just get an update on exactly what approach we're thinking about, just so that I'm not cold when we ultimately get to that discussion.
Absolutely, we'd be happy to do that.
Yeah.
Any further questions for the staff regarding the Cvta TAC update? Seeing none, we'll move on to old business. And we'll go to item 6, the transit governance report. I know that staff has reviewed the submitted rating of a potential consultant, and will this week discuss and selected DRPT on-call consultant to perform the study. I'm going to ask Mr. Parsons to speak to that.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Just a little bit of background. The legislation requires 2 things that are transit related for the Cbta to consider in this first year. The first is, and Mr. Ure mentioned it briefly earlier, the first is a regional transit plan, which GRTC is heading up. And we actually had a great meeting yesterday with their chosen consultant, Michael Baker, to kick off that process of developing the regional plan. That is what GRTC is going to be using to establish their transit priorities for the region, for their 15%. What's on the agenda today is related to the second item, which is the transit governance report. And just to read from the legislation itself, the Cbta shall evaluate the governance structure of transit service in the Richmond region, including the evaluation of establishing a transportation district. So this component of transit work for the Cbta is related solely to the evaluation of the governance structure and the worthiness of establishing a transportation district. The item on the agenda we have received, we solicited in December for proposals from the DRPT bench. These are pre-qualified consultants that have already met all of the procedures and regulations for work. So we were able to use that as a public agency, that bench, and we received 2 proposals that are fully qualified for the delivering of this transit governance report. As Mr. Ure mentioned, the Cbta TAC is reviewing these proposals on Friday. Everyone has been able to look at those already, but we wanted to have a group conversation about that as well. The idea is that the TAC will then be able to make a recommendation to the full authority when they meet next week. And this will be on your January 29th agenda, so that after that January 29th meeting, the consultant can get started and deliver this report back to the authority no later than the end of June. The motion that is on the floor for you today is to recommend that the authority approve a transfer of $80,000 from the contingency line item. It's actually labeled reserve for contingency of the approved FY21 administrative and operating budget to a new line item called contracted services. And it's seen on the screen here, highlighted at the bottom of the professional services item. So it basically makes available the top end. This would be able to provide payment for the consultant, regardless of what the TAC recommends and the authority chooses. The top end of the proposals was, I believe, 79 and change. So the movement of this budgeted item to contracted services from the reserves would be able to cover either of the two proposals. So that's the recommendation today from staff, is to make that move from the reserves for contingency to contracted services, so that everything will be lined up for the 29th, so that we can get moving with the consultant once the decision is made.
Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman, may I ask Mr. Parson a question? Ms.
Chair.
Parson, did you say that we have contracted this with a particular group?
We have not. That's the
Okay.
process that's happening next week with the TAC. Is they'll make a recommendation about which group to use.
Okay. Well, my comment is that one of the things that the group has mentioned in the past is making sure that as we choose various and sundry groups, to make sure we keep in mind this whole notion of inclusion. And so I just want to make sure that we continue that.
Yes, sir. We fully intend to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's a valuable notion.
Mr. Chairman, Canova Peterson here.
Mr. Peterson.
Chad, I'm having a little bit of a hard time separating this request from the GRTC. And this sounds to me like this ought to be coming out of the GRTC funding rather than the full Cvta funding. Please get into a little more depth, help me understand why this should be funded by the upfront before the Cbta distribution. I mean, for the GRTC distribution.
Yes, sir. That's a great question, and you're not alone in the confusion. I think a lot of people are intrigued by the notion that the legislation set out to evaluate governance. Our view is that this is a one-time item that evaluates not just GRTC but transit services throughout the region. So it may not be just GRTC services. Right now, a lot of the operations that are taking place are provided by GRTC, but this governance study puts the responsibility in the Cbta's hands rather than GRTC, so that Cbta can take ownership of a full evaluation of transit in the region. If GRTC was, I'll just make an assumption. If GRTC was leading this study, then I would imagine GRTC would be would be the driver behind it in terms of the services provided. What the intent here and staff's intent is to allow the Cbta to have an unbiased third-party review of transit services in the region. And we've modeled this process and the scope after similar studies that have been done in other peer regions like Northern Virginia, DC, and other agencies around the country.
So are you saying the GRTC will not be directly involved in this study any more than any other jurisdictions?
That's correct. Our hope is that, and I think both proposals do allow for interviews of GRTC staff and their board of directors. We certainly value the input and feedback from those constituents, but we see GRTC as an agency at the table just like anyone else for this study. They certainly have a wealth of information that will be provided and useful to this process. But we're viewing this, and the way that it reads in the code in the legislation is that this is an independent review of transit governance in the region.
Okay, and again, it's a one-time
Yes, sir.
review.
Mr. Chairman,
Who I can't see.
that's Mr. Gregory.
Mr. Gregory.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I might just add a brief comment to back up what Mr. Parsons just explained. There's a clear distinction between the transit governance report that staff is recommending you all make the motion on today, and the regional public transportation plan that GRTC is responsible for. And those things are dealt with differently in the legislation. The regional public transportation plan, which is an annual plan that GRTC is responsible for, the statute is clear that GRTC shall develop that plan. Whereas the transit governance structure report, which is a one-time thing, it is clear in the statute that the Cvta is responsible for that. So there's the distinction there.
Mr. Gregory, thank you for clearing that up. Are there any more questions?
I have one more, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Peterson.
How did we come up with the $80,000?
The 80,000 is based on the two proposals that were received. We've once we determined that both proposals were qualified and met all the requirements in the scope of work, we looked at the fee proposals, and that 80,000 would cover either of the two proposals, just to make sure that there is enough in the budget to cover the work that is proposed.
Are we making a recommendation as to who the consultant should be to the Cbta?
Yes, that's what TAC is going to be working on later this week and at their meeting next week. They'll be making the recommendation for the 29th.
Okay, thank you.
Any other further questions? Well, there is a requested action, a requested motion. Will someone make that motion?
So move, Mr. Chairman.
The motion's been made. Is there a second?
Second.
There has been seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. The ayes have it. The requested action, the motion to recommend the authority to approve transfer of $80,000 from the reserve contingency line item of the approved FY 2021 administrative and operating budget to a new line item entitled Contracted Services Other within the professional services category for purposes for completing the transit governance report as required by Virginia Code has been approved.
Mr. Chairman, this is Ms. Mueller. I just want to double check. I was unable to make out who made the second to this motion.
Gosh, I can't remember who made the second.
It may have been me. I think Mr. Thornton made the motion.
Yeah.
And seconded.
Yes, thank you so much.
Lightning fast. I'm sorry, Nicole.
I got it.
Okay, great. All right, now we'll move on to item 7 under old business, and that is the financial policies and fiscal arrangement. And Ms. Heater will speak to this item. Ms. Heater.
Thank you. I just wanted to give you a brief update. As you know, at the last committee meeting, the committee members took action to approve a modified set of financial policies and procedures that would support the fiscal agent agreements with the County of Chesterfield and the City of Richmond. We're working with staff as we speak to put those procedures and practices in motion, and we'll have a report back to you at your next meeting with regard to recommendations for specific assignments of responsibilities across the 3 agencies to make sure that we have adequate controls and separation of duties for fiscal management. We've had one work group call among the finance directors. We did have all 9 in attendance. in December, and are working with them closely to be able to set up the actual steps necessary to initiate the transfers for the local distribution of dollars. As you may guess, we are establishing a validation process so that when we get the report and the deposits from the Department of Transportation, we'll be able to provide each jurisdiction a review period so that each locality can affirm that the figures are consistent with what they would expect for the period, and then we'll initiate the transfers. So we're working through all of those processes. I will just forecast to you that following the action in December from both the authority to authorize the committee to move forward on some of the policies and procedures, and then your action will be bringing back the more robust set of policies and procedures to this committee for review and recommendation up to the full authority. So we're driving toward having the complete set of policies and procedures with regard to financial administration and management. We've taken that in a stepped process to be able to activate the financial transfers from VDOT to the Cvta and to the jurisdictions, but we'll be coming back with a second round of policies and procedures that are more substantial and address some of the feedback that you have given with regard to vendor selection and purchasing inclusion. We'll have procedures that speak to disbursement of authority member stipends, kind of the whole gambit of the financial transaction activity that the authority will undertake. So please look forward to probably your February meeting with a review of the existing policies that you adopted in December. We will likely have some edits to those once we've actually been able to get into the work of them, and then additional policies and procedures for your review that will go forward to the full authority. So,
Any questions for Ms. Heater regarding the financial policies and fiscal agent arrangement? Well, Ms. Heater, I just wanted to say that, I have confidence that the finance working group and staff will provide some continued input and for necessary revisions as they continue to develop processes to fulfill the intent of the currently approved policies and procedures, the arrangements we've already made. So I just want to tip my hat to our finance working group working together collectively, collaboratively to get us where we are today. And obviously, I hope we will continue to work in lockstep. So thank you. Now we'll move on to new business. Under new business, the first item we have is item 8, which is the revenue transfer schedule, the inflows. Ms. Heater, will you provide us an update?
sure, thank you. I just wanted to sort of talk through, because it's been a couple of months anyway since we've discussed this, but just wanted to give you sort of a high level update about the status of the funds to date. As you know, the fuels tax began collection, the additional revenue for the region for the fuels tax, which is at the wholesale level, began July 1. So the revenues are collected on a lag basis, as you would probably imagine. The vendors in the community, the vendors in the community submit their tax payments to the state. Those are reconciled and calculated, and then the data are transferred through the various state agencies. We have received a report that is inclusive of July through September receipts for the fuels tax. You are also aware that the sales tax began on October 1, and so we do have October 1 through 31 receipts as well. Those funds, as of the bank account establishment, are ready to be deposited into the Cvta accounts. Again, from a high level perspective, as a reminder, per the code, your administrative and operating budget comes off the top. So that initial deposit will be allocated to the jurisdictions, and that's by the revenue source jurisdiction. And that is data provided by the state to us. The localities will be asked to validate that information to assure that it is consistent with what is expected for the collection periods. And then the $500,000 will be proportionately reducing each of the local distributions, and then we will activate the transactions to transfer local dollars at the 50% rate to each of the jurisdictions according to that formula. So I have made that sound probably less complex than it really is, but we have been working with the finance director's work group to be able to provide the necessary information with regard to period of collection, the calculations by jurisdiction to be able to establish a baseline for comparison for each jurisdiction and their receipts. And I think all of the finance directors are working to understand how they will evaluate that internally. Our target is to be able to provide 48 hours once we submit the report out on the receipt of the funds to each of the jurisdictions. Once we receive 100% of the validation, 100% response back from the jurisdictions with regard to validation of the tax collection data, then we will initiate the transfer. That's largely driven by our desire to be error-free in this process. But we're also talking through with the finance directors how we will reconcile any errors that exist. If there's a post-period, filing amendment or that kind of a thing, so that we can make sure that we keep the books as clean as possible for each transaction. Again, we're working with that committee to sort of talk through what that process will look like. Plan RVA staff have committed to providing an analysis cover sheet to accompany the data that is provided by the state, so that we can supplement that information to hopefully aid in the review. And so the finance work group will be reviewing that draft template cover sheet. And then once they sign off on the contents of that, we'll be able to put that in effect and move that forward. I would be very happy to share this information for your review at the next meeting if you'd like. Some of this is largely kind of administrative, but we do believe it'll be useful data in making sure that funds are being received and transferred as they should be. So again, from an inflow perspective, the state provides a fairly generic report to us that shows by jurisdiction, including the city of Richmond and the 7 counties, I'll say derivation of tax revenue for sales and fuel tax. I will mention Mr. Peterson. I know that folks from the Hanover County team and the town of Ashland team have been working to come to an agreement with regard to the allocation of the tax revenue for both sales and fuel tax to the town and the county. And so that will be incorporated into this report. So each jurisdiction will see by locality the summarized revenue by jurisdiction for each of the 2 tax sources, and the projected distribution based on the formula of 50% to the localities. That'll be validated again within that 48-hour period. And once we receive 100% local jurisdiction validation, we will then initiate the transfers to localities. Once this is up and running, I believe that it will be a monthly activity. And so we'll be able to provide a report to you on whatever frequency you would prefer that would summarize the status of the Cbta accounts and the distributions to the local jurisdictions. So that's on the kind of inflow side. I think I'm bleeding over into the process for review and approval of payments, but wanted to stop there on the inflow side and see if you have questions or really also any direction from us about information that you would like to see on a regular basis as far as reporting.
Ms. Teeter, I was just going to say, as we transition to transferring local funds, I know during the negotiation and subsequent approval process of the VDOT MOU, the committee members agreed that the Virginia Department of Taxation would bear the responsibility for collecting and depositing into the Cvta fund all revenues associated and with additional sales and use taxes, and that the Virginia Department of Motor Vehicles, DMV, bears responsibility for collecting and depositing into the Cvta fund all revenues associated with the additional motor fuels taxes imposed. What we were able to review was the monthly activity and year-to-date statement submitted by VDOT on current funds available, and we believe there needs to be additional clarification on how the sales and use tax, and especially the gas tax revenues figures were arrived at. Do you have any idea about that?
Yes, the finance work group had some questions and asked for additional information. And so that was that additional analysis cover sheet that I was mentioning. We've forwarded the questions to Department of Tax and are working to identify the appropriate personnel at DMV to forward the questions there, and are working on that to be able to address those answers or address those questions that were provided.
Okay.
For members of the committee and the public, just the mayor, Mr. Chair, is referencing a summary report that we received. Each of you would have seen a template of this in the VDOT transfer agreement as one of the exhibits. We received a draft copy of that for the period through October 31 of receipt. So again, July through September for the fuels tax and October 1 through 31 for the sales tax revenue. I would say that the figures in the reports are at the very highest level they possibly could be. And so we've requested assistance from both departments to be able to provide additional detailed data to support those reports so that we can undertake that validation process.
Mr. Peterson?
Thank you. Ms. Hader, if I understood you correctly, you said the distribution was going to be determined and that the operating expenses of Cvta were going to be taken from the percentage, the 50% that's being sent to the jurisdictions. My understanding was this operating expenses were coming off the top.
Yes, sir.
Before any distribution.
I apologize if I miscommunicated that. What you just said is correct. According to the code, the administrative and operating expenses come off the top. The 50% distribution is applied after the administrative and operating expenses are accounted for. So in this initial deposit, the whole of that deposit will be reduced by $500,000, and then the 50% distribution will be applied. We are not, based on the code and the interpretation and consult with legal counsel, the administrative and operating budget comes off the top, not from any one of the three distribution pockets.
Thank you. I misunderstood you then.
Apologies. I might have said that backwards. So.
Any further questions, comments for Ms. Heater?
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Carroll?
So I guess my next question is, I understand that there is a question as it's been relayed to the numbers as they have been reported to, specifically we're talking about the fuel numbers. And so how long is the review process going to take before we think we can get consensus from all of the jurisdictions? Because quite frankly, my understanding from what you just explained is none of the money is going to get deposited into anybody's account until we have consent across the board.
Yeah, our target, and I think the consensus of the finance work group, is to have all the concerns resolved by the end of the month, if not before. So I would expect that by your meeting, we would be able to give you a status update about whether the transfers have been initiated or they're actually completed, and the local distributions are in the local accounts.
Okay, and hopefully we'll get more of an idea of how long it will take when these questions come up to get that the answers resolved from the other agencies.
Yeah,
maybe.
I would say, I mean, candidly, the response level from the team at VDOT and Department of Tax has been very high. I would say the greatest delay has just simply been because I've been reaching out to the group since December 20th, and the last 2 weeks of the month, as you can imagine, had people on vacation and various holiday leave. But I've actually been surprised with the level of response that we've gotten from folks and the willingness to be as helpful as possible with all of our questions.
Isn't it also true, that, for example, we could have a particular company that doesn't make their payment on time, and that would end up carrying over into the next report and the next check, if for some reason they didn't make it before the deadline.
That's correct. And I think a big part of item 9 is going to be to sort of talk about reconciliation of delayed payments, as well as reconciliation of payments made in error. I mean, I would imagine that all of the jurisdictions are very familiar on the tax revenue side of instances where a business files their taxes with the wrong locality referenced in the filing. So these are not things that are not insurmountable. We just need to work through the process to be able to reconcile it and make sure that the dollars get distributed the way that they're supposed to.
I agree 100%, but those type of things are the type of things that'll happen that'll make a jurisdiction question the numbers, to say, well, that doesn't make any sense because, based on our previous numbers, we've had this and all of a sudden we have this. And I think it's important for us to all to remember that, there is, in the private sector, a company may not pay the bill on time, which could, and then if you have multiple companies that do that, that could actually affect the way the numbers look. So just want to make that point. Thank you.
Thanks.
Any further questions? Ms. Cedar, do you have any more on item 8?
No, I'm ready to move on.
Let's move on to item 9, the processes for review and approval of payments for disbursement, the outflows.
Thank you. Thank you. So we have discussed, and Mr. Gregory has agreed to assist us in the development of memoranda of understanding that will be between the Cvta and each individual jurisdiction that guide the disbursement of the dollars. I think that our objective is to keep that as sort of simple and streamlined and straightforward as possible, but it will be the documents that will govern some of the things that we've talked about: the review period for validation, how we address reconciliation of errors, or as Mr. Carroll mentioned, there might be instances where collection dates don't match up with what would be expected, and so how would that get picked up in the next reporting period? We want to make sure that we have kind of clear understanding among all parties of how we will go about this. Mr. Yor mentioned in his report that the TAC next Monday will be also starting the discussion about the contents of the annual certification for use of the received funds. And so we'd like to incorporate their recommendations into that MOU as well. So this is one of those work products that is largely reliant on the input and the deliberation of both the TAC and the Finance Committee. So as Mr. Yor said, they're starting with content to be developed at the TAC on the 11th. I would expect in February, we'll have draft MOUs to come to you to review. We want to make sure that all parties are engaged and have the opportunity to participate in the process to make sure that everything is documented as it should be in these MOUs. I will also mention that in addition to these memoranda of understanding with each of the 9 jurisdictions, we would also expect to have a template agreement that would guide the distribution of funds to GRTC following the authority's approval of the transit plan for the region. And so it would similarly detail the method of payment, the timeliness, the certification process for GRTC and their reporting back to you, and what have you. So we're working and have been able to access similar documents from Northern Virginia's Transportation Authority, so that we're not starting from zero, but we'll have those as guidance for us. So again, I would say that 8 and 9 are really just kind of previews of what we're working on with staff and what will be coming back to you for review at your upcoming meetings. No action today.
Any questions or comments on the outflows? Seeing none, we'll move on to item 10, future meeting topics. And I think 8 and 9 sort of sum some of that up as well, that, these are some of the topics that we will likely be digging a little bit deeper into moving forward. Obviously, on our agenda in future meetings will be the consideration and discussions about the financial management policies and procedures, roles and responsibilities, the FY22 administrative and operating budget, and also the future staffing needs of the Cvta. Just something to start noodling about as we continue to meet during the remainder of the winter and into the spring. Lastly, we're moving to just about penultimate, the item 11 Cvta Finance Committee member comments. Are there any comments from the committee? No comments from the body. I will just say I continue to be impressed by the open lines of communication and also the work of our staffs and administrations in our respective localities to continue to support what we need to do here to make the Cvta work, make it run. I think Chairman, Mr. Chairman, you've mentioned before that this is something that we've never undertaken before at creating a Central Virginia Transportation Authority. And so all the work that we're doing today will obviously live on beyond us, and we want to make sure we get it right for future generations. And that's exactly, I think, we've been devoted to. And I want to tip my hat off to our friends at Plan RVA, but also our teams, our respective teams in our jurisdictions as well. Still a lot of work left to be done. This is just the beginning, and I'm glad we were able to launch in 2020, but there'll be a lot of work to complete here in 2021. With that, I have nothing else. No one else has anything else. A lot of stone-faced looking individuals on this screen right here. I appreciate you all waking up at 6 o'clock in the morning like I know a lot of you did. I know I'm sorry for my tardiness. I just beat Mr. Brown by he beat me by a minute. And we know normally he's the last person to join the Zoom. So with that, our next meeting will be February 10th, 2021. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So moved.
Second.
Is there a motion to adjourn? Thank you, everyone.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Take care.
Dave.